Hi everyone, my name is Annie, and I have a twin sister, Annie. Have you ever seen twins? More often than not, they are similar to each other, and they are confused, but with my sister Annie, everything is different. We are not that similar to each other, and we are actually completely different. Now you will understand why. While you sit down, watch, do not forget to like the video, write comments under the video, and subscribe to the channel. We were born, and it became a big holiday for the family. Dad and Mom were looking forward to their 2 daughters. We were given names and we grew up. My mother told me that as a child, she always tried to buy us the same clothes, to pay the same attention to each of us. While we were young, there really was no difference. The changes began in the transition age. That's when the differences and conflicts between Annie and me began. I always noticed that she didn't like me. Annie took most of the sweets, toys, and if she liked my toy more, although we were given the same thing, she broke mine. She is 10 minutes younger than me and always reproached me with this. I often complained to my mother about my sister, but my mother only asked me not to swear, and that was all. The worst thing was at night, we were put to sleep in the same room, and every night Annie scared me, threw toys at my face, slammed the window sharply, once even cut off my hair. But the most interesting thing is that she managed to get out of most of it, almost always. My childhood fears and complexes developed thanks to my sister. The stories about the friendly sister seemed fabulous. And then we grew up, and my sister's hatred grew stronger. At school, I did well. I was an excellent student, won competitions and Olympiads, which cannot be said about my sister. For some reason, she was a terrible student, and I always did her homework for her. The teacher set us down separately so as not to confuse us, and my sister often pretended to be me in order to get a good grade for her homework. But over time, the teacher learned to distinguish between my handwriting and Annie's manners. When we were 14 years old, I began to gain weight noticeably, which cannot be said about my sister. I don't know why it happened, but I was very worried about it. The only way out was to eat stress food, and so I did every day. After a couple of years, I was already too fat, so much so that I wore the same clothes every day. The other clothes didn't suit me stupidly. Annie rejoiced in my disappointments and tears. She often bought me dresses, pants, and blouses to spite me, and tried them on in front of me, and I looked enviously at her flat stomach. I threw all my strength into my studies, so I was a completely excellent student, and Annie was a beautiful 2-year student. Every day I woke up with a feeling of disgust. I was disgusted to see myself in the mirror, to wear the same thing, and yet there was no support from the outside. While I was buried in textbooks, eating in front of books, my sister was building a life, making friends, and even managed to have some kind of relationship with a guy. I saw her from the window when he brought her home. Annie went into her room, took off her raincoat, and began to talk about what a good time she had. She spoke with a special sense of pleasure about things or people that I didn't have. In the summer, after the end of the school year, I decided to go to the gym. Those were the hardest months of my life. Only those who have lost weight will truly understand how difficult it is to work on your body, how difficult it is to be on a diet, not allowing yourself to eat anything you want as you did before. I cried in the hall. I wanted to give up a million times, to leave. I was angry at myself, at my nature, and even at my mother. Why did you give birth to me like this? But my mother always said that she did not give birth to me like this, that I was the same as Annie, but then I began to eat. I would come home tired and out of sorts, and my sister would go on living the life that I could have had. In return for the failures in sports, I made up for it with my brain. I was able to find interesting intellectual quizzes in which I participated and won money. They might be small, but they were enough to pay for the gym and buy separate diet food. I went there all summer, without missing a single training session. And you know what the most offensive thing was? I did not lose weight by a gram, not by a centimeter. It was just awful. I came home and sat in the corner of my room and cried my eyes out. It seemed to me that the universe itself was against me living happily. In response to my tears, Annie just smiled. She was acting really weird that night. At first, she laughed hysterically, and then she went into the kitchen and drank a martini. My parents were not at home at the time, and it was the first time I saw my sister drinking alcohol. I calmed down. Her behavior was frightening. "Are you drinking?" I asked her, but she could barely speak, and then she would cry. "That's how it happens. I have a perfect figure and he still left me. What else did he need?" she said and wept bitterly. At this moment, I wanted to comfort her. Despite our complicated relationship, I still loved her. When I hugged her, Annie started laughing hysterically. "You? Are you comforting me? I'm the one who should be comforting you. I don't need your support. It's easy for you to do it. You've always been better than me at everything. Our parents love you more just because you're smarter. You study well. Every now and then, they give me you as an example." I was taken aback, asked what she was saying, but Annie was furious. "What? Surprised? What else was I supposed to do? I couldn't let you be more beautiful than me," she screamed. Then my hands began to shake, and I didn't know what it all meant. From the drunken delirium, I was able to make out that my sister gave me some supplements every day to make me fat. She did it every day, and finally, they worked. That's why sports and diets didn't help me. "I ruined your life, but it didn't make mine any better," my sister said again and burst into tears. At that moment, I wanted to hit her, curse her, and in general, I didn't want to see her again. I went to my room and didn't speak to my sister for 2 weeks. She didn't say anything at first, but then she started apologizing, but I was too angry. Then my sister told my mother about everything, for which she received a lot of punishment. Well, then I was taken to the hospital, where I underwent a course of treatment purification from drugs. 6 months have passed since then. I lost a lot of weight, but not completely. There's still a little left. On our birthday, she asked me to forgive her 100 times, and then she made a speech. She said that she didn't deserve a sister like me, that envy blinded her and she almost killed her twin. Annie cried bitterly, and in the end, I forgave her. Since then, our relationship has improved. Annie now helps me dress stylishly, introduces me to friends, and takes me everywhere with her. Would you forgive her if you were in my place?
My name is Gloria, and I have been the only and most beloved child for most of my conscious life. Do you know how great it is to be the only one? This is when all attention is focused only on you, when everything is delicious, only to you, when you are taken to your grandmother, where you are waiting for goodies, cartoons, new toys, and sometimes pocket money, and everything is done for you. When my parents got married, they worked hard to buy their dream house as soon as possible. The years flew by, and they were all saving up money. Finally, this happy moment had to come. They were able to acquire housing. My mother told me how euphoric they were flying with my father, because having a roof over your head is a fairy tale. Well, then it dawned on them that it was time to have children, and then the problem started. In short, my mother could not get pregnant for a long time, so she was forced to undergo several different courses of treatment together with my father. It is good that they supported each other, did not retreat, and did not fight for happiness. As a result, after a few pounds of medication, my mother was diagnosed with infertility. She and Dad weren't ready for this, although it's unlikely that anyone will be ready for this at all. Their hands dropped, my father began to drink, my mother closed in on herself. It was as if their home had become a storehouse of grief and tears, rather than the happy moments they had planned. And then, when their marriage almost broke up, my mother's mother came and threw up the idea to adopt a baby. It became something of a second wind for my parents. They seriously thought about it, began to study the issue and collect documents. They didn't care if it was a boy or a girl, but a child. On that exciting day, when they came to watch the children, a barefoot, dirty girl ran out of the orphanage, grabbed both of them by the hands, shouted, "Mom, let's go home!" And my parents' hearts fell in love. It was me, the little girl who met them on the doorstep. My parents vowed to tell me the truth about who I was and where I came from. I still don't know my birth mother, and I don't really want to, because I've really had a good time with them all these years. I received as much warmth, care, and affection as many children from the orphanage did not receive. So we can safely say that I had a happy childhood. Definitely. And then one day, when I came home from school, I found my parents at home. They were sitting in the kitchen whispering, Dad hugging Mom tight, both of them crying and smiling. I didn't understand what was going on. When they saw me, they called me to them, hugged me tightly, and said, Honey, you're going to have a little brother or sister. They probably expected a different reaction, but I wasn't happy about the news. I immediately imagined the whole nightmare waiting for me. Of course, this is great news for my parents, and maybe if I wasn't adopted, it would have been great news for me too. But no, not for the girl from the orphanage. Not for her. I knew perfectly well that my own child is my own, and I will always remain a stranger. And when the baby is born, they will understand the difference in us. They will feel that this baby is more native to them, which means that I am no longer needed. Will I be returned to the orphanage again? I asked with a terrible voice. My parents protested. Of course, they called it stupid and said that I was their own child. But I understood that it only took time. As the months passed, my mother's belly grew rounder and bigger. Along with it, my anxiety grew in my heart. I stopped being that carefree, cheerful girl, stopped kissing and hugging my parents. I didn't go near my mother's stomach. I didn't listen to it, I didn't talk to it, and I didn't want to touch it at all, because there was a person growing up who would get me out of the house. I knew it and waited. Well, then something happened that should have happened. My father took my mother to the hospital. I was sent to my grandparents. I waited for several annoying hours until finally my father called and said, Girl, I heard how happy grandfather and grandma were, how they congratulated them, each other, and then they came to kiss me. But I pulled away, locked myself in the bathroom, and cried there for 20 minutes. The next day, my father came to pick me up and said we were going to see my little sister. He reacted to my denials with laughter, translated everything into a joke, then put me in the car and drove away. As soon as I crossed the threshold of the hospital, I was handed an ugly bouquet of flowers, and then my mother came out with a pink envelope in her hands. When she saw me, she began to smile, ran up to me, gave my father's envelope, and began to hug me. I missed her very much, and I was worried, and I only realized it when I hugged her. My eyes filled with tears. And then my father held up the pink envelope in which the little red ball was sleeping with its eyes closed. Her name is Eliza, my father said. This is your little sister, he added. The words made me want to throw up. The longer I looked at it, the more I realized that it was the essence of my end, or rather, the end of their love for me. We arrived home, where the four of us stayed, and against our background, I noticed how scrupulous my parents are about every sneeze. They kept running after her. My mother spent 24 hours with her 7 days a week. My father worked, and in the evenings barely had time to eat, take a shower, play with a baby, and passed out. There was no time for me. I belonged to myself, and this thought lived in my head along with a feeling of hatred for my sister. The more she grew, the more my loneliness grew. Looking at my mother's phone, her entire photo gallery was filled with photos of her and mine. Once, twice, and not enough. In general, the first year of Eliza's life was the worst in my life, even worse than in the orphanage, and I told myself that I can't take it anymore. I wrote a note, left it on the table, packed my things, and left the house. My parents thought I went to school as usual, and they didn't even ask me why I had such a big bag. I knew that there was no more room in their hearts for me. That day, I walked where I had to, turned off the phone, and ran around the city. When it got dark, I found a rotten motel, wandered there, and began to think about how to continue to live. Because I did not want to go back to the orphanage, I spent the night there, if you can say so, because I didn't sleep. I didn't eat most of the day, and there was a lump of resentment and unspoken words in my throat. The next morning, I decided to go to a nearby city to get a little lost. I needed to find some work and a permanent bed. But when I was buying tickets, a woman looked at me askance, and a minute later, a policeman came up to me. At the sight of him, I ran towards the subway. I ran as fast as I could, but they caught up with me and grabbed my bag. An angry employee immediately put me in the car and drove me to the police station, where my parents and Eliza rushed in an hour later. I was sitting on the bench, crying, and my mom and dad were saying in both ears that I was a stupid girl. They took me home, interrogated me. My father was mad. My mother was either crying or yelling. It's not clear at all. Then Eliza came up to me with hesitant steps. In the middle of all this fuss, her footsteps seemed so soft. She came clumsily up to me as I sat on the floor, put her arms around my face, and said, Gloria! My name! She called my name. Her first word was my name. Gloria. Oh my God, you have no idea how I felt at that moment. My heart sank. My parents fell silent, and I suddenly put my arms around her. And for the first time in her tiny life, I kissed her. Something had changed in me, and I couldn't hate her. My Eliza. Another year has passed since then, and I discussed old grievances with my mom and dad, and I realized that I am still as important to them as before, only now there are more of us in their lives.